Mr. President, the government of Guyana has said it is intent on ensuring the conduct of credible elections in the shortest possible time. To achieve this, you said you'll pursue the full implementation of the Caribbean Court of Justice's decision. The CCJ on the 18th of June said that the most sensible approach to appointing a chairman of the Elections Commission is to meet with the opposition leader and to hammer out the process. The court believes that that consensual approach would allow you a role in the identification of a chairman. How would you evaluate you and the government's response to this path that the CCJ has outlined?
We have complied completely with the ruling of the court of 18th of June and also with the consequential orders. We have engaged the opposition, the government has engaged the opposition, and on 6 occasions since the 4th of July, I personally addressed the nation on 3 occasions, indicating that we are in full compliance with the ruling of the court and the consequential orders. So the purpose of my engagement is to ensure that we have credible elections in as short a time as possible. At present, there is no election chairman of the commission because I invited the previous chairman, Justice Patterson, to a meeting, and we agreed that he would demit office. The commission cannot function without the chairman, so I have put a lot of emphasis since my meeting with the former chairman to ensure that the chairman is selected. We are now embarked on the process in accordance with the ruling of the CCJ. That is to say that there should be a selection based on a consensual process. And that is what we are attempting to do, both by a contact group, which I have appointed, and Mr. Jagdeo, the leader of the opposition, is appointed, and by face-to-face meetings.
But, sir, the opposition, in inviting you, let's go back, the CCJ would have invited you to participate in that selection process, the putting together of that list, so to speak. But the opposition is of the view, and Mr. Jagdeo has said this repeatedly, that you ought not to have a role in that process. What are your views on that?
I'm not sure that the opposition understands the implications of the ruling by the CCJ. The CCJ made it clear that it is not altering the Constitution, it is interpreting the Constitution by suggesting that we move away from unilateralism, which is why the appointment of Justice Patterson was flawed, towards consensualism. This means that if the president of Guyana has a role to play in the selection of the chairman, the process will be faster and both sides would be happier at the end of it because we would have agreed during the stage of the process on the appointment of the chairman. I can only do that if I am involved. I am not a passive participant. I'm not a passive observer to the process. I'm an active participant in the process. And this is what we've been trying to do, and this is what I've been trying to get the opposition to understand, that I cannot simply sit and wait for them to send the list, because this is what failed in the past. And this is what forced me to rely on the proviso in the Constitution, empowering me to appoint a chairman if the list submitted by the leader of the opposition was not in accordance with the Constitution. So it is very important we pay attention to the spirit and the letter of the consequential orders. That is to say, the president must be given, must be given a role, and it means that I have to be involved in the selection of nominees before those nominees come back to me. It is no longer a one-sided affair, it is no longer unilateral, it is consensual. And both government and the opposition have to be involved. And this is why the contact groups, the working groups between the two sides have met 4 times. 4 times since the 4th of July. And we will continue meeting in order to ensure that the ruling of the CCJ is implemented. And the Guyanese people could look forward to having a chairman of the Election Commission, a functional elections commission, and elections in the shortest period of time.
Sir, you mentioned that process by which both teams, the government side and the opposition side, would have been hammering out the list, or lists, because you submitted your nominees and Mr. Jagdeo did his. But your names were rejected altogether by Mr. Jagdeo. Do you believe that this rejection hampers the way forward in terms of hammering out that list before the formal list is provided to you?
Well, it is a recipe for gridlock. The important thing which the CCJ aimed at is to ensure consensualism. That is to say, there must be a spirit of compromise, there must be acceptance of the role of the president in hammering out the list. And similarly, we are to aim, both sides are to aim at having a list of candidates which are not unacceptable to the president. And this is, unless we accept that principle, we will end up in gridlock, and that is what we're heading for if the opposition continues to deny the president a role in hammering out that list. I believe the ruling by the CCJ is quite useful, is quite functional, and it will lead to an early conclusion of this process. There is no way that the removal of the president's role in the crafting of the list, the hammering out of that list, could result in an outcome that is consensual, that is acceptable. It would be spurious if the opposition insists on exclusively crafting that list, of unilaterally crafting that list. The CCJ's ruling makes it impossible for that to occur.
Mr. President, you said a few moments ago that the ruling of the CCJ relative to the guidelines put forward by Justice Saunders for a consensualism approach by both sides is useful, but the opposition is deeming the government's approach as a delay tactic to prevent elections from happening within the next 3 months, let's say. How do you, and you're not acting in good faith, how do you respond to something like that, given all that you've outlined prior?
Well, I would say that the government is acting correctly and in good faith. I would not have set up a working group to meet with the opposition 6 times in 3 weeks, unless I was acting in good faith and unless I was interested in a favorable outcome for both sides, a win-win situation. So I would say that it is misleading to the public. It is misleading to the people who are looking forward to having swift and credible elections to say that we're not acting in good faith. I would like to see the opposition sitting down with the government side and hammering out the list. This is what the CCJ asked us to do. And this is what I've been trying to do since the 12th of July.
So basically, Mr. President, you're saying that you have been in full compliance with the orders granted by the CCJ?
Fully compliant, and it is my firm conviction that the orders, the consequential orders passed by the CCJ could result in an outcome which will benefit the Guyanese people as a whole by having clean elections in as short a time as possible. I believe it's a good solution, and I'm working to implement that decision.
Last week, sir, you in an address to the nation, you said government accepts its interim status. What do you mean by the term interim status?
There's nothing in the Constitution which defines interim status, but in the jurisdictions which adhere to the Westminster system, if you want to call it that, in Canada, Australia, and other countries, we have consulted with the laws, and interim government means that we do not, for example, pass a budget. We obviously have to keep government running, routine functions of government. I cannot undertake state visits and sign agreements with foreign countries. We have to limit our expenditure. We have to ensure that we don't embark on any controversial projects. So there are about half a dozen or more conventions with which we have to comply to ensure that the government restrains expenditure, restrains its its actions. It doesn't mean that the government is out of office. It doesn't mean that the government ceases to function. They cannot be avoided. We cannot have a country that is ungoverned. So we are aware of the international conventions, and both the Chancellor of the Judiciary in Guyana and the CCJ, the President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, cited a Canadian expert, I think Professor Hogg, and we are abiding by those 6 principles. We accept the status as an interim government, and we are not going to breach the convention.
All of your actions thus far, would you deem them to be within the scope of your powers as president?
Entirely. We have consulted with the opposition. We have accepted the status as an interim administration. We have set out to ensure that the process for the election or the selection of the chairman of GCOM is expedited. We have gone back to the National Assembly and provided GCOM with the funds needed. And I have said that I will await GCOM's announcement, or GCOM will advise me when elections could be held. And as soon as I get that information, I will proclaim a date for elections. So everything we have done so far is consistent with the law, the ruling of the court. For example, on the 25th of April, I lost 4 of my ministers because they were dual citizens. And it is very painful to me, but I complied with the law. So in every respect, everything that has happened so far this year, in fact since the 21st of December, has been in accordance with the law, the rulings of the court. We have made appeals. Those appeals have come to an end on the 12th of July, and I will continue to act within the Constitution and within the law.
Mr. President, you have spoken time without number of the need for a credible list before we proceed to elections. How can you assure Guyanese that you are committed to having free, credible, and fair elections in the shortest possible time?
We accept that the list was bloated. We accept that there were far too many persons on the list who might be ineligible. And we believe that many people who are not on the list are eligible and should be on the list. For these reasons, I have called, and my party, the People's National Congress Reform, the Partnership, APNU, and the coalition, APNU plus AFC, have all called for house-to-house registration. I have seen in the newspapers that the Election Commission, not on my prompting, the Election Commission will embark on house-to-house registration from the 20th of July. These are not my doings. These are the doings of the Election Commission, and I support them. We should have a clean and credible list. But in any event, at this stage, only the Election Commission has the authority to run elections. Not the executive, not the National Assembly, not the President. And I am going to abide by whatever decisions the Election Commission takes with regard to the preparation of a list. I will abide by the advice of the Election Commission on when to call elections. Right now, it is only the Election Commission that could determine the time and the form of elections. And I am prepared to abide by their decisions.
Sir, final question. How confident are you, how optimistic are you that the gridlock that exists currently between the government and the opposition can be resolved so that we can see an appointment of a chairman soon?
I am prepared to meet the leader of the opposition to resolve any problems that might arise. At present, although I use the word gridlock, it might be a strong expression. I do feel that there might be a misunderstanding on the part of the opposition, and I am prepared to sit with the leader of the opposition to arrive at an interpretation of what the CCJ said. As far as I'm concerned, the interpretation is quite clear, and it means that the president must have a role. Must have a role. That is the word the CCJ used, must have a role. And I would resist any attempt to prevent me from exercising that function that has been given to me by the CCJ. The role of the president in the crafting and hammering out of a list must be respected.
Thank you very much, sir.